4 p.m. here in Moscow. Headlining today from RT International, a migrant shot by a guard and beaten by a crowd in Israel after being mistaken for an attacker as fear, confusion and deadly violence continues to shake the country. As the Syrian army's offensive against jihadis goes full steam ahead, we meet the people struggling to try to maintain some sort of normality in their lives on the edge of terrorist-held areas. And German Chancellor Angela Merkel offers to help Turkey speed up its long-standing bid to join the EU if Ankara stems the flow of refugees coming into Europe. Hello there, very good afternoon from me, Kevin Owen. You're watching RT International. Our top story, an Arab-Israeli gunman opened fire and killed an IDF soldier at a bus station in southern Israel. Police say the attacker was killed after a protracted gun battle. He wounded 10 others before being shot dead. Another man, who was a migrant meantime, in a twist here, was shot by a security guard. The guard had mistaken him for the attacker's accomplice. The victim later died in hospital. With more details, Paula Slier is in Tel Aviv.
This is a tragic case of mistaken identity. An Eritrean national who had sought refuge here in Israel was mistaken for being an accomplice to the attacker during last night's shooting at the central bus terminal in the southern Israeli city of Beersheba. Now, let me warn you that some of these images are disturbing. What happened is that this attacker grabbed a gun off an Israeli soldier. He started shooting randomly and people started running. And a security guard of Arab descent noticed that this Eritrean man was not running, but was in fact walking, and that aroused his suspicion. He thought he was an accomplice to the attacker, and he shot him 4 times. When people saw the security guard firing at this man, they too understood him to be an accomplice, and they started pushing him and throwing chairs and tables at him. They prevented the paramedics from reaching him for a short period of time. This Eritrean man later died of his wounds in hospital.
An investigation has been opened and we're looking in to see if any civilians damaged him or caused his death in any way whatsoever, and that's due to the fact that we had CCTV footage of the incident inside the central bus station when the terrorist attack was taking place.
It is one of the most serious incidents that has happened in the heart of Israel since violence erupted at the beginning of the month. And it triggers fears and concerns. And what happened last night is really an indication of how everybody here suspects everyone else, and the sense of fear that is dominating the society.
Since the start of October, 8 Israelis and over 40 Palestinians have been killed. One Israeli, though, was the victim of another kind of violence. RT talked to Yuri Rezkin, a Jewish man who was stacking shelves in a supermarket when he was stabbed in the back. It turned out the attacker was a Jewish vigilante who'd mistaken him for an Arab.
Victim is a big word. I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. If it hadn't been me, it would have been somebody else. I never experienced any violence towards me from the Arabs. Every nation has people fighting amongst themselves. 2 people can fight and it has nothing to do with religion. I call on the people, the majority that want to live together and work together, live near one another, who do almost everything together without meaning anything bad. I call on them to overcome this minority that attacks, murders and stabs.
Now the news from there, Israel's begun erecting now a 5-metre barrier between an Arab neighbourhood in Jerusalem and a Jewish one. Police say that wall's only been put up temporarily, but it is at a flashpoint of the violence. For his part, the Israeli Prime Minister, meantime, says he will go after those who fund the attacks. He also promises to maintain the status quo at Temple Mount, that holy site revered by both Jews and Muslims, over which these latest tensions began. But despite the Israeli PM's staunch security stance, Yuri Rezkin again believes his policy is largely misguided.
Netanyahu is looking for somebody to blame. He should look into himself and try to realize where his mistakes stem from. Most of the blame belongs to him, and on the other side to Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas. Sometimes there are disagreements, but it's possible to resolve them through dialogue. There's no need to use violence. Each party is trying to pass the buck to the other side, and neither succeeds. And those who are in the middle of this are doomed, both peoples. In war, there are no winners, only losers.
Meantime, in Gaza, thousands poured out onto the streets to show their solidarity with the Palestinians in the West Bank. The growing unrest in the Middle East has spurred protests around the world, as we've been showing you this weekend too. The latest, you're looking at Paris there, about 1,000 pro-Israeli demonstrators gathering outside the country's embassy supporting Prime Minister Netanyahu's course of action. And there have been rival rallies squaring off against each other in New York's Times Square. A few minor scuffles were reported there too. Now, Syria, there, 49 targets have been destroyed in the latest round of Russia's anti-terrorist strikes in the country. Russian jets made 33 sorties from their base in Latakia. Among the targets hit are ISIL's HQ and arms depots. Here's footage of a terrorist command post being completely destroyed. Backed by Russia's airstrikes, the Syrian army has been carrying out ground offensive against the jihadists across the country. In the constant chaos gripping the country, Syrians are struggling as best they can to try and get on with their daily lives. RT's Lizzie Phelan reports next from one market in Damascus where people flock from all parts of Syria.
Every day, Syria comes together again here, at least, in this market, with produce sold from across the country. These potatoes, for example, coming from ISIL-held territory in Aleppo, being sold in this government stronghold of Damascus. These cabbages are from Dara in southern Syria, the apples from Homs, both of which are partially under the control of the Al-Qaeda affiliate Jabhat al-Nusra. Transporting this fruit and veg from local farms to the Al-Hal market is one of the most dangerous journeys in the world. These truck drivers have to navigate lethal obstacles in territories where anti-government militants change laws constantly. The most grueling part of their work is maintaining the flow of their produce out of areas run by ISIL. A gentleman just asked me to come and sit here next to him, and he's telling me that everybody in the market, or in this area at least, is running away from me because they're truck drivers that have come from areas controlled by ISIL, and they fear that if their faces are shown here, that they'll have their heads cut off. Some drivers eventually agreed to talk with us, because after a few close shaves, they cut out ISIL territories from their route, so they no longer risk retribution.
They would cut my head off if I go there. When I used to travel to Aleppo, I used to travel with my soul in my hands, because there are the landmines, common thieves on the way, there's ISIL and the risk of beheading. I come from outside of Raqqa, so I'm not aware of the regulations they have imposed on the people there. So if I go there wearing jeans, I would be held accountable. If I grow my hair or comb it in a certain way, I would be held accountable too. If I smoke, I would be held accountable. If I have a cell phone on me, which they don't like, I will be held accountable. They're very difficult.
My worst personal experience when travelling to ISIL areas was that they found a packet of cigarettes on me, and they said they would let me go this time, but I have to pay a fine. Next time they would punish me with 20 lashes, so I stopped going there.
It's not just bringing this produce to the market, which is a risky enterprise. Even being here and selling it here can be life-threatening. Sometimes mortars land here because we're right next to the anti-government held Joba, which starts just from that electricity pole over there. And as you can see from the destruction, we're right next to the front line. It's not just shells that threaten people here. There's also a risk of being hit by gunfire, which we've been hearing just now as clashes are going on this morning. Walid Bayloni lost his 3 kids and home to mortar shelling.
The greatest danger is the shells which they fire at us. Within a few seconds you see someone you know dead or wounded, and then in 10 minutes the market would be empty because everyone has fled, running for their lives. 4 days ago they fired a shell at the market and killed someone I know who was working just meters away from where we are standing.
But while Damascus isn't exactly safe, the truck drivers, when they finally arrive here, breathe a sigh of relief. Traversing territories held by people who see each other as enemies involves harassment, endless checkpoints, having to pay bribes, and the risk of losing their cargo, or even their lives. Unlike the rebel-held areas they've come from, Al-Hal, at least, still resembles a Syria they recognize.
Just think of it. A packet of cigarettes would cost you 20 or 30 lashes. So when we arrived in Damascus, it was like a wedding day for us. We had food, safety, and no one will take away what we've earned.
Lizzie Phelan, RT, Damascus.
Thus far, there's been little international consensus on how best to resolve the Syrian crisis. But after dodging meetings thus far with Russia, Washington now seems ready to talk.
Everybody, including the Russians and the Iranians, have all said there is no military solution. So we need to get about the effort of finding the political solution. And I will meet with leaders from Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan to work through real and tangible options that could perhaps reignite a political process and bring about a political transition in Syria.
Syrian political activist Amr Wakaf thinks the White House is turning to Russia to try and cooperate with the Syrian government without actually having to engage in direct dialogue with Damascus itself.
ISIS is a real threat to everyone in the region, and the Americans and their allies in the region do have a lot of leverage on stopping this disease, this cancer, and it's an ideology, it's not a group. So they should talk to the Syrian government, and the way they see it at the moment, because they've cut all ties and there is no way back for them, they have to go through the Russian door, which is again, a shame because the Syrian government is there. At the end of the day, this sort of ideology needs to be engaged firsthand, not through proxies.
Other developments there, the UN's cultural heritage body UNESCO now has approved the deployment of UN peacekeepers to try to protect historical sites from destruction. 53 countries voted in favour of the move after Islamic State demolished that ancient Roman temple in the city of Palmyra. The war in Syria has witnessed the destruction of some of the world's most cherished cultural sites so far, including this ancient mosque in Aleppo, which is more than 1,300 years old. The Crac de Chevalier Castle, dating back to the 11th century, was almost seriously damaged too during the conflict. Hundreds more UNESCO heritage sites are currently in danger as well. We spoke to the organisation to find out why it's so important these buildings are saved.
This is happening in Syria, it's happening, we have seen also in Yemen and in Iraq, of course, and this is spreading. It's our ethic and moral responsibility to make sure that cultural heritage is taken care of, because we know that they represent really the identity and the community. And then we know how much this will be needed in the recovery phase and the rebuilding phase of a state. If this is gone and it's fragmented and is destroyed more and more, of course, more difficult will be to maintain this bond, not only of monument, but what I'm saying also of cultural practices of community that is an integral part of their identity. I mean, this is extremely important.
Among the stories coming up when we come back after this quick break, we're heading into why the distraught parents of an unarmed American teenager shot dead by a policeman are taking the officer to court after he was cleared by prosecutors.
Easy right or wrong, but I definitely think sanctions are better than conflict.
You don't perform for diplomatic reasons. You perform for humanitarian ways.
I'm talking obviously about Edward Snowden.
I believe he's a hero. I believe he's coming directly from his heart.
Hello again. The escalating refugee crisis is forcing Europe to compromise in its stance towards Turkey now. Ankara is being promised the perks of visa-free travel then to the EU and renewed membership talks on top of it, all for the country's help in stemming the immigrant flow across its borders. Angela Merkel proposed the ideas to the Turkish president on Sunday.
There have been good reasons for the EU and Turkey to start working closer on accelerating the membership process, visa freedom, and the deal on migrants. The talks have been very promising and will be continued.
Well, joining the European Union has been on Turkey's agenda for a long time. Of course, it applied to be a member of the European Economic Community, the EU's predecessor, as far back as 1987. But its bid, time and again, has been stalled over such issues as human rights, the economy and the country's occupation of Cyprus. In 2013, Germany blocked EU accession talks with Turkey after Ankara's crackdown on those mass anti-government demonstrations witnessed there. Indeed, only last year, Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the European Commission, said that Turkey was nowhere near close to EU membership, but times they are a-changing, maybe. Let's talk about that then with former British diplomat William Mallinson joining us live on the line. Hi, William. Yeah, Turkey is being promised a lot here all of a sudden. How desperate is the EU then for Ankara's assistance?
The EU is desperate for Ankara's assistance, because especially Germany, because in Germany, let's not forget, there are over 1 million Turks and Kurds, and they don't want the Turkish-Kurdish question to blow up in Germany. The Germans are always frightened of any hint of chaos within their own borders, and they always have been. Now, behind this, we have to look behind the stage, of course, are the Turkish elections, because Turkey is very interested in being seen to be cooperative on the question of the refugees, because there are elections on the 1st of November. And the more money they can get also from Germany, the more votes Erdogan's party gets. So that's part of the picture. Other part of the picture, since you mentioned Turkish membership, let's not forget that Turkey is occupying part of the European Union, which is Cyprus, which it doesn't recognize. That alone makes the question of negotiating with Turkey rather farcical and rather bizarre. Turkey is considered extremely important to NATO. And the main reason for that is, which goes right back actually to 1792, when Britain needed Turkey against Russia. It's exactly the same today. Turkey is considered very important, more important than Greece, incidentally, because of what is seen as Russian power. Therefore, anything that be done to sweeten the Turks is good. And the Turks, remember, exploit this very successfully. You have Incirlik air base, from which they're bombing Syria. You have the missile defense system. So into the equation comes Russia, but at the moment Russia does not seem to be talking or being asked to talk on how to solve the refugee crisis. Oddly enough, once Syria is in order, I suspect a lot of these refugees will go back to Syria.
Let's look at what the Turkish president had to say. Sorry, William. The Turkish president Erdogan knows he's got the upper hand by the looks of it just last week. Let's just look at this quote that he came out with directly. He said, yes, Europe's security and stability is contingent on our security and stability. They, the EU, have accepted this now. So I guess he feels he's in an extremely strong position to get these deals that they've been wanting all along.
Well, legally, Europe is not. Turkey is a member of NATO, so the European part of NATO is together. So each country is contingent on the other, for a start. As to how important Turkey is to the defense of Europe, if you consider that the Americans are particularly interested in strengthening Turkey because of Russia, that can actually complicate issues for the Europeans. A second factor, we must remember that neither Britain nor the United States want to have a properly independent Europe, in other words, a European army that will act without NATO's permission. And that's another reason they want Turkey in.
It's not a very sincere move, though, is it? I mean, it's been, as we said just now, it's been Germany up until very recently been blocking any talk of Turkey coming on board with EU membership. So, I mean, if you're in Turkey's position, you'd be going, well, do you really mean it, guys?
Now, if I were in Turkey's position, I would know that they don't really mean it, but they're trying to look good at the moment. We should also remember a complicating factor is that at the same time, Angela Merkel is making moves to try to stop the sanctions against Russia over the Ukraine. That's a further connected issue, you see. So it's all connected. On the one hand, the US will be happy to bring Turkey into the European Union, which it desperately wants with Britain, because that makes a much bigger market. It weakens European integration completely. I mean, Giscard d'Estaing himself said that it's the end of Europe, etc. So that's on the one hand, that the Americans are quite happy to do anything that will help stability in Turkey, because they're frightened, very frightened, that after these elections there will be further chaos in Turkey, because of the Kurdish problem.
We'll be following
which
it
is
closely.
also connected to the Syrian problem.
Exactly, it's a very interconnected world, as you're saying there, William. Former British diplomat William Mallison.
Yes.
It was a pleasure to have you on the programme and giving us your thoughts on this, as I say, very interconnected and complicated world. Thank you. There's been a wave of anti-migrant protests across Europe in recent days, as well as a number of arson attacks on refugee centres too. The German government's placing the blame for the escalating tensions on anti-Islamization groups such as Pegida.
No one who follows Pegida can free themselves from responsibility for acts that inspire hatred, for burning homes or injuring volunteers who help refugees.
Keine Scharia in Europa!
Durchquerten Länder. Warum stellen Sie nicht dort den Antrag? Warum bleiben Sie nicht dort? Und mindestens 2 Länder.
I spoke with one of Pegida's leaders who insisted to me that the violence is not their fault.
We always said we are peaceful and we are the only form of expression of these kind of resistance. There is no public debate about the changes in our society, which we have to expect by hundreds of thousands of male Muslim asylum seekers. And these discussions are suppressed in Germany. Instead, these left, no border, no nation ideologists try to prevent any debate. Isn't it quite natural that the people are worried about loss of their homeland, their values, their culture, and ultimately of their freedoms?
It's not just Germany either, where people are increasingly swinging right. In Switzerland, the right-wing anti-immigration SVP parties won 1/3 of seats in parliament on Sunday, the largest number for any Swiss party in at least a century. Anti-Islamic sentiments also growing among people in Britain too. Covering that, here's Polly Boyka for us.
The sound of hate. This woman, filmed here on a London bus with her child, is in the middle of a foul-mouthed Islamophobic rant aimed at 2 fellow passengers, women wearing Muslim headscarves.
Shouldn't even be in this country. You're lucky I don't work for immigration.
As Britain fights ISIL abroad, hate crimes against Muslims have become more frequent at home. This 16-year-old girl was knocked unconscious in a London street as she made her way to college. And this poster, telling Muslims to, quote, get out of the country, was displayed in a London pub several weeks ago. Islamophobic attacks in London have shot up by 70% over the past year. And the majority of these attacks are against women who wear headscarves or the full face veil because they're easiest to identify as Muslim.
Sometimes people throw things at me, you know, people tend to be scared of what they don't know. And because they don't know who I am or what I look like, and I'm so different from them, it's a bit intimidating for them. That's the way I see it.
What's been the most unpleasant incident you've had in London?
Someone threw pennies at me and called me names and told me to get out of this country. Yeah.
How did that feel? I mean, you sound British.
I was born here. I was born here and I was raised here, so it was a bit unnecessary.
Because of the recent surge in attacks and to broaden understanding of the extent of Islamophobia in Britain, the government's going to change how it records hate crimes by specifically categorising anti-Muslim attacks in England and Wales.
I think there was a study done recently about the fact that most Islamophobic crimes don't get reported anyway. When it happens to someone, who do you go to? What do you say? Do you feel comfortable going to say it anyway? And it's just things like that. No one feels comfortable saying it. So you can change it as many ways as you like. Who's going to? The question has to be asked: how do you get people to come report it in the first place?
Prime Minister David Cameron says he'll back Muslims in standing against people who spread hate. But in some communities, it may be too late, as members of the British public continue to link law-abiding Muslims at home to acts of terror abroad. Polly Boyko, RT, London.
The parents of an American teenager shot dead by a policeman in February are suing the officer now after he was cleared of wrongdoing by the county prosecutor. The sheriff's deputy had pulled over 17-year-old Devon Guilford, who'd flashed his car lights at him.
Right now, we're refusing to give me your ID.
I have not committed.
Refusing to give me your ID.
No.
Get out of the car. Get out of the car. I'm telling you right now.
Oh, I don't have a weapon.
Hey, get your son, get your hands behind your back. You're under arrest.
You can't do that.
Get your hands behind your back.
Officer, what are you doing?
Get your hands behind your back.
After that exchange, there was an alleged altercation between the two, which then saw the officer shoot Guilford 7 times. These are pictures of the officer after the incident. The Guilford's lawyer says the boy's parents had at first believed police claims that their son had been behaving badly until they saw the video.
Immediately after the incident, the Michigan State Police conducted an investigation, and then the prosecutor had to review all of the evidence before he could make his decision about whether or not to bring criminal charges. And during that time, neither the video or any of the other evidence was available. So they didn't really know, what the video would show or what had happened. And the family actually has a great deal of respect for law enforcement. They have a lot of law enforcement members among their family and friends. And until they saw the video, they were sadly convinced that their son must have done something terribly wrong to have had this happen. And it was only after they saw the video that they realized that, their son had ended up dead after being pulled over for flashing his lights.
Just ahead, former Afghan President Hamid Karzai joins Sophie Shevardnadze to reveal his thoughts on the resurgent Taliban offensive in his country. You're watching RT International.